Is Sean Hannity right? Is the press secretly rooting for impeachment proceedings against President Trump? Let's talk about it. Joining me now, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union and a proud father of 5. Matt, happy Father's Day.
Same to you, Brian.
Thank you. I'm going to need some advice from you about raising girls.
Let me tell you, I got 5 girls, and today I have 2 dance recitals, so I'm hoping I slip in a beer at some point during the day.
Well, this segment's going to be easy compared to all that. Let me bring in 2 more guests with you in Washington. Caitlin Collins, who was, up until this week, a White House correspondent for the Daily Caller. As of tomorrow, she'll be covering the White House for us here at CNN. Congrats, Caitlin. And also with us, Alex Connaught, former communications director for Senator Marco Rubio and a partner at Firehouse Strategies. So I've got all of you with me here to discuss. Matt, to you first. Do you perceive that journalists, reporters, commentators are trying to get this president impeached?
Well, I was on Sean's show on Friday, and I think there's real truth to what he says. Look, I think when we say words like the, or terms like the media, obviously media is very diverse. I think it's very fair to say that the overwhelming percentage of people who are reporters in this country tend to contribute to liberal causes and vote for liberal candidates. I think that's undisputed, and I think there's a lot of kind of post-election malaise by reporters who felt like they gave Donald Trump a free pass during the primaries, and they're trying to overcompensate for this coverage. And I think it is further dividing them from the viewers, even though everyone's numbers are up all over the dial because so many people are engaged to listening about politics because of all of this tumult in the Trump presidency. But there is no question that there is a massive bias that Trump faces every day.
Caitlin, what do you perceive at the White House among your fellow reporters? Are journalists thinking they're going to see an impeachment?
I think hoping for an impeachment and watching for an impeachment are 2 very different things. I think reporters have scrutinized the president's actions, the way he fired James Comey, the fact that he said it was because of the Russia investigation, the fact that James Comey said he asked him to shut down the investigation into Mike Flynn. So I think reporters are watching the president's actions and reporting on what he's doing, but I don't think anyone is secretly rooting for the president of the United States to be impeached. I don't see why this is being turned around on reporters. This is an investigation that has gone on for nearly a year now and was about Russian interference in the election, but because of the president's actions, he's made this about himself.
Journalists are focused on these investigations. What you hear from commentators on the right is that journalists are too obsessed with these Russia issues, Alex. Is there truth to that? Is there a point there?
Well, I actually agree with what both and Caitlin said. Look, to Matt's point, there is no doubt that there is a liberal bias in much of American media. Most reporters are left of center. But I think there's an even bigger bias towards covering conflict, towards covering crisis. And there's no bigger conflict or crisis than the impeachment of a president and a scandal. And so in a week like this, where the president did do some big good things, like the Cuba policy, which my former boss Marco Rubio worked on, that's totally overshadowed by the ongoing investigation, his tweets about the investigation, because that is such, the bias is towards that sort of conflict and that sort of scandal. So as long as there's a whiff of scandal in the White House, that's what the media is going to cover.
But wasn't that true during the Clinton presidency as well?
Well, I would argue that the Clinton administration handled the coverage around the scandal better than the Trump administration, which to the extent the Trump administration seems to have any sort of strategy, it's to let the president tweet out whatever he wants, but then don't let anybody else say anything at all, try to cover up all the facts. You know, they're not being transparent. They're not answering questions directly. As you pointed out in the opening segment, the president hasn't done a press conference in months, hasn't given an interview in weeks. I think that's the opposite of what the Clinton team did, which was very transparent, very forward-leaning on the Starr investigation in the 90s.
So Alex, Matt, you're both describing bias. Matt, I just saw a tweet from a viewer, Danny, who says, reporting on Trump's negative behavior is not biased coverage. Ignoring the negative behavior would be biased coverage. But what do you make of the idea that, yes, the coverage may have a negative tone? That's because this presidency is struggling and dysfunctional.
Well, look, I worked for a Republican president, the last Republican president, who it's just so strange how these Republican presidents seem to have a scandal around firing people they're legally allowed to fire. Judge Gonzalez, when he was Attorney General, had the same problem with U.S. attorneys. We get wrapped around the axle on doing things we're allowed to do. Bill Clinton fires every U.S. attorney in the country, no scandal. Bill Clinton fires an FBI director, no scandal. It's a strange thing. And look, I do think that the way President Trump handles these questions is new, is different. We didn't have Twitter in the Bush years. He's actually very out there and commenting on all types of things. There's a lot of Republicans who actually want him to comment and be engaged less. I think the good news in all this, and I disagree with Alex, is that he has a very good team, including a very good comms team around him as he faces the questions around what the special counsel is doing. And I think he needs to listen to them. I think he's got top-notch talent there. And I think that he needs to just keep plodding away at his agenda like he did in Miami. Alex is right. It doesn't get as much national coverage. But if you look at the Miami coverage and the South Florida coverage, it was fantastic. And it was upholding a campaign pledge. He needs to keep doing that.
He's not going to gain any support in the approval rating polls, though, with something like a Cuba policy, is he?
Yes, he is. Absolutely. Because
yeah?
it's two things. Yeah, number one, it reconnects people to why they wanted a change agent in the White House. And it also reminds people, remember, he has a very diverse coalition. And South Florida, as Alex knows, is much more diverse than people realize. And the fact that he is connecting to these folks is awfully important. Also, we're talking about policy. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about free and fair elections. Those are the types of things any president should want to embrace.
Caitlin, when you're at the White House covering this beat every day, do you find reporters are increasingly asking about the president's emotional state, about why he feels he has to post these tweets at all times? And that's another one of the critiques you get from the Hannitys, is that journalists think that this president is crazy.
Well, reporters are looking at the president's tweets, and they are reporting on him because we've never had access to the president's emotional state like we do with Donald Trump. We've never had a president who got on Twitter every morning and told us exactly what he was feeling about the news, and Donald Trump does that. And that was the problem for his lawyer, Jay Sekulow, this morning. Donald Trump tweeted last week, "I am under investigation," and Jay Sekulow said this morning that that was not what he meant. So it's a problem for his communications team and his lawyers to have to go on television and explain what he means in tweets and saying that we shouldn't take the president literally.
Alex, where do you come down on this? I think journalists do have some biases, if you want to call them biases. One is toward competent governance. One is toward decency in civic engagement. Some of the coverage that I think you get complaints about from the right is because journalists are trying to promote those basic inherent American values. And when the president's railing against the fake news media on Twitter, calling this a witch hunt, I think that's why journalists react the way they do. Do you think I'm off on that?
No, I think you have a valid point. Look, the media loves bipartisanship. You know, whenever there's a big bipartisan gathering on the Hill, the media applauds it. But that's not really what they want to cover. That's not really what they want to talk about. They want to talk about conflict. They want to talk about fighting. They want to talk about Republicans attacking Republicans, Democrats attacking Democrats. I can tell you, I've worked for a lot of Republican members of Congress. The easiest way for a Republican member of Congress to get on TV is to go attack Republican leadership or the president, President Trump. And so, that I think is what the media really wants to talk about on a day-to-day basis. And it's a real challenge of governing, because when you do have moments where you bring people together and do bipartisan things, it can be really hard to have that get the attention that a big fight would get. And so it's a challenge not just for the president, but for members of Congress as well.
Fascinating.